Sometimes the world surprises us with stories that feel like they belong in a movie, but are, in fact, painfully real. And this story is one of those rare and shocking moments that leaves you questioning how much progress has really been made and why bias still hides in plain sight. Because when a successful Black woman, the founder and majority owner of a respected bank, walks into her own building and is treated like an unwanted intruder by her own staff, it reveals not just the personal humiliation of one individual, but the quiet, dangerous assumptions that still shape our workplaces and our lives. And this is why you need to stay with this story until the very end, because what happened in that bank lobby will not only surprise you, but will also challenge you to see how unconscious prejudice operates even in places where you would expect professionalism and progress. And perhaps by the time this story concludes, you will see why systems must change, not just attitudes, because this is not just about Dr. Amelia Richardson. This is about every person who has ever been judged by their appearance before their worth, and why her response, not with anger, but with decisive leadership, may have transformed an entire industry. And to understand why this story is so important, we have to start in the ordinary setting of a quiet morning at Metropolitan Trust Bank, where staff prepared for another day of serving clients, where customers waited patiently, where security stood ready but unaware that something extraordinary was about to happen. Because when Dr. Richardson entered the lobby that day, dressed not in corporate armor, but in the casual comfort of someone visiting her own domain, she did not expect suspicion. She did not expect confrontation, but that is exactly what she received as the branch manager, Marcus Webb, approached her, not with a greeting, but with a warning, demanding to know her purpose, insisting that she leave. And despite her calm explanation, despite her quiet assurance that she belonged there, his suspicions deepened, his voice hardened, and others joined him, security staff and even a few nervous tellers who glanced at each other, confused, unsure, but willing to trust their superior's judgment. And this moment became the spark for what followed, because customers nearby pulled out phones, began filming, began whispering, because in America, when a Black professional is wrongly accused, when bias unfolds in public, it no longer stays hidden. It becomes viral, and within minutes, footage of their own confrontation spread across social media, shocking viewers who could not believe that the woman being told to leave was in fact the CEO, the founder, the owner of the bank herself. And this irony, this collision of perception and reality, is what made the story explode, because it forced the public to confront a truth they would rather forget: that power and wealth and success are not shields against prejudice, that even those who have built empires can be reduced in an instant by ignorance and assumption. This is a truth that Black professionals in every field know too well: doctors mistaken for nurses, judges assumed to be clerks, executives treated as assistants. These microaggressions are part of a daily quiet struggle to be seen, to be respected, to be believed. And this is what Dr. Richardson faced in her own creation, her own space, a space she had dreamed into reality with years of labor and vision and investment. And this is what makes the story not only painful, but also powerful, because she did not respond with fury or outrage or spectacle. She responded with leadership and strategy. And this is where the story shifts from humiliation to transformation, because after revealing her identity, after summoning a regional executive who arrived breathless and horrified to confirm her truth, she did not settle for apologies or resignations or private shame. She chose reform. She chose to expose the system that allowed this to happen and to rebuild it from within. And this choice matters deeply, because history shows us that lasting change comes not from scandal, but from structure, from rules that prevent bias, not just punish it after the fact. And this is why Dr. Richardson designed what she called the Amelia Protocol, a comprehensive reform package that forced the bank to examine its assumptions, to train its staff, to monitor its practices, to create transparency and accountability. This is what real leadership looks like: not revenge, but repair; not punishment, but prevention. And this matters because the problem she exposed is everywhere, hidden in plain sight: in corporate offices where resumes with ethnic names are discarded, in hospitals where patients of color receive less pain medication, in universities where students of color are assumed less competent, in stores where shoppers are followed and questioned. And the only way to break this cycle is with systems that catch the bias before it acts, with checks that force fairness before judgment. And this is what Dr. Richardson gave her bank, and by extension her industry, because when the Amelia Protocol was announced when other banks saw the public support the rising stock prices, the customer praise they, too began to adopt similar reforms, not from guilt, but from market pressure from the realization that fairness sells, that respect builds trust, that diversity is not only moral but profitable. And this is the deeper lesson of the story, that justice is not only a right but an advantage, that companies who respect all people will lead because they will win the trust and loyalty of a wider world. And this truth is why her story spread beyond the bank into business schools, into law courses, into seminars on leadership, because it teaches that courage and grace in the face of injustice can build more than any protest can break. And this is not theory. It is real, seen in the growing number of minority customers who brought their business to Metropolitan Trust in the surge of job applications from young graduates who wanted to work for a company that stood for something real, and the quiet pride of employees who now knew their workplace would protect, not punish them for being different. This pride is the real victory, the quiet revolution that Dr. Richardson began not with anger but with wisdom, because she understood what many forget, that rage burns fast but change lasts, and her change will last because it is written not in headlines but in policies, not in drama but in systems. And this is why you must watch to the end, because this story is not only about what happened, it is about what can happen in every company, in every institution, if leaders dare to follow her example. If they dare to see injustice not as scandal to hide, but as a wound to heal. And this choice is rare, but it is the choice that makes all the difference. But what happened after the moment of public embarrassment in the lobby of Metropolitan Trust? Bank mattered far more than the incident itself, because when news breaks in the digital age, when injustice goes viral, the first response of most companies is damage control, quiet statements, legal threats, private apologies. But Dr. Amelia Richardson chose a different path, one that would transform not only her own bank, but an entire industry, because she understood something few leaders grasp. That crisis is opportunity, that failure reveals what training hides, that only by facing the truth can an organization heal. And so she gathered her senior staff, her board members, her top advisors in a private emergency meeting, not to assign blame, but to find answers, to ask the hardest question of all: how could this happen in our own house? And the answers that came were uncomfortable, but necessary, because the truth was clear. Despite policies, despite slogans, despite diversity brochures, bias still lived in the daily instincts of her team, and this realization led to something rare. My decision to change everything, to build from the ground up a culture that did not tolerate assumption or prejudice, a system that caught the problem before it hurt someone again. And this decision became the Amelia Protocol, a bold, unprecedented framework that would force every branch, every employee, every manager to confront their blind spots, to prove their fairness, not claim it. And this framework began with radical transparency. Every customer interaction at every desk, every teller, every loan officer would be recorded, reviewed, not to punish, but to learn to spot patterns of rudeness, impatience, assumption, before they grew into discrimination. And then came training, not the usual dull seminars, but immersive role plays where staff were put into the shoes of customers, of color, of immigrants, of the disabled, to feel for themselves the sting of doubt, the chill of distrust. The humiliation of being seen as less in this empathy training changed people, because it turned theory into lived experience, into memory. And from there, the reforms grew: monthly audits where mystery shoppers of every background tested the branch's regular reports, where managers were scored, not on profit alone, but on customer respect surveys, anonymous and detailed, where customers could speak their truth without fear. All of this reported to a central ethics committee with real power, with authority to demand correction, to reward fairness, to punish neglect. And these measures were not cheap, not easy, not quick, but they were real, and they worked, because slowly the bank began to change. The staff grew more alert, more humble, more cautious, not with fear, but with care, because they knew their actions mattered, their attitudes visible, and customers noticed too. They felt the difference, the warmth, the patience, the genuine welcome, and they rewarded it with loyalty, with deposits, with trust. And this trust spread, and with it, the bank's reputation rose, and with it, its profits. And this is the irony that Dr. Richardson knew, but others forgot, that justice is not just right, it is good business, that People want to spend where they are valued, that respect grows. Markets, not limits them, and this truth made Metropolitan Trust a star in the industry, praised by the press, sought after by investors, copied by rivals because competitors saw the numbers, the new accounts, the higher retention, the social media praise, and they wanted it too. And so the protocol spread first to small banks afraid of bad publicity, then to giants like First Alliance and Grand Financial, who rolled out their own versions, and this wave of reform changed the landscape of banking forever. Because now bias was not just a moral risk, it was a financial one. And this is rare in history when ethics and economics align, but when they do change, becomes unstoppable. And this change was powered by stories like Dr. Richardson's told in business schools and corporate retreats, in diversity summits, as the perfect case study of crisis turned to opportunity. This story mattered to young professionals too. Black graduates who once feared rejection now dreamed of working at Metropolitan Trust knowing they would be seen, and this talent flood made them banks stronger, richer, more creative. And this growth made the board proud, but none prouder than Dr. Richardson herself, who saw her nightmare turn to victory, who saw her shame turn to strength, and who knew that her choice to lead with wisdom, not rage, had changed more than herself. It had changed the game for everyone, and yet the personal cost remained, because even success does not erase the memory of humiliation, of being doubted in your own creation, of seeing fear, not respect in the eyes of those who serve you. And Dr. Richardson carried this scar not as bitterness, but as warning, as fuel to drive her mission, because she knew the danger of relaxing, of assuming the battle won. And so she watched carefully the reports, the audits, the culture, because movements fade when leaders rest, and she would not rest, and this vigilance made her beloved by some, feared by others, but respected by all, because even her rivals knew she had set a new standard, a new bar that they must meet or be left behind. And this is the real power of leadership, the power to raise the game for everyone, not by decree, but by example. And this is the lesson that other industries now learned as tech firms, retail chains, airlines began to ask, could they build their own protocols? Could they stop bias before it harmed? And many tried, inspired by Metropolitan Trust. And this wave of reform reached far because the public demanded it, because customers now knew they could ask for it, because one woman's quiet strength had shown them it was possible. And this quiet revolution matters more than headlines, because it lasts, because it shapes the unseen daily choices of millions, and because it proves what many still doubt, that grace under pressure can win more than rage, that dignity can defeat injustice, that leadership, not noise, changes the world. And this change now lived in the policies and practices of 1,000 offices and would shape the future in ways no one yet knew. But what made the story of Dr. Amelia Richardson and the Metropolitan Trust Bank even more remarkable was not only the institutional change that swept through the company after the incident, but also the personal transformations that unfolded quietly behind the scenes in the lives of the very people who had contributed to that moment of public shame. Because what happened next proves that redemption and growth are not only possible, but necessary if true progress is to be made. Because Marcus Webb, the branch manager, who had so confidently ordered the CEO from her own bank, faced the harshest fall from grace, losing his position, facing public disgrace, his name trending for all the wrong reasons. But instead of vanishing or spiraling, he chose an unexpected path of reflection and repair, because after the storm of media condemnation and professional exile, Marcus did something rare. He enrolled in a graduate program in diversity and organizational leadership, not to escape blame, but to understand his own blindness, to unpack the assumptions that had led him to misjudge Dr. Richardson. And he documented this painful process in essays and lectures that were later shared in corporate training sessions across the country, turning his mistake into a lesson. For others, a reminder that unconscious bias is not only real, but deadly to trust. And this personal transformation was not the only one, because Lisa Chen, the assistant manager who had stood by silently during the incident, torn between doubt and obedience, also faced a turning point. Because after a long internal struggle and a mandatory training period, she chose to become part of the solution, joining the bank's newly formed Diversity Council, leading workshops on courage and ethical decision-making, reminding others that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. This redemption story mattered because it showed the staff that change was not only possible, but expected that growth was not only allowed but required, and even Rodriguez, the head of security, who had followed Webb's lead during the confrontation, stepped forward, volunteering to lead the security. Team's new bias intervention training program, using the footage of the incident as a painful but honest teaching tool to make sure no other guard under his command would ever misjudge a person. Based on appearance again, and this culture of humility and learning spread throughout the company, creating an environment where mistakes could become fuel for wisdom, not just shame. And this change touched even outsiders like Sarah Martinez, the young customer who had live streamed the original incident and whose video had triggered the public outcry. Because when the bank's leadership reached out to her, not with threats, but with gratitude and an offer to join their community outreach program, she accepted, becoming a paid consultant, helping the bank design policies that ensured transparency and fairness. And this circle of change mattered because it turned every actor in the original injustice into an agent of reform. Because when systems change, but people do not, the result is hollow. But here the people themselves grew wiser, stronger, braver. And this human transformation rippled outward into the wider industry because other banks, hearing the story and seeing its results, sent their own managers to train under the Amelia Protocol to learn how to dismantle the quiet habits of exclusion, to listen to voices they had ignored for too long. And this cultural shift mattered deeply because it suggested that what began in one humiliating moment could heal not only a company but a sector, because this is how real social change happens, not through grand speeches alone, but through quiet repentance, daily improvement, honest confession. And this process resonated in other industries too, because soon tech firms, retailers, law offices reached out, asking to learn from Metropolitan Trust, seeking to build their own systems of bias prevention, because leaders now understood that in the age of viral exposure, injustice is not only wrong, it is expensive. And so change became a business imperative. And this is why Dr. Richardson's choice to forgive, but not forget to reform rather than punish, mattered so much, because it turned shame into strategy loss, into leadership failure, into a foundation. And this strategic grace caught the attention of regulators, government agencies who praised the Amelia Protocol as a national model for financial institutions, and whose recommendations to other banks and credit unions included its principles and practices. This official endorsement secured the protocol's future, making it not just a company policy, but an industry standard. And this mattered because it ensured that long after the headlines faded, the lessons would remain encoded in contracts, procedures, expectations, shaping the daily decisions of thousands of employees serving millions of customers. And this legacy transformed Metropolitan Trust from a name to a symbol of change, a brand associated not with scandal but with progress. And this reputation paid dividends as customer numbers rose, as stock prices climbed, as media outlets ran stories of reconciliation and recovery. Because in a world hungry for good news, for proof that people can learn and institutions can heal, this story shone bright, and it inspired others. Because when viewers saw the footage of Dr. Richardson calmly asserting her dignity, when they read of Webb's quiet apology and Chen's brave growth, when they heard of Martinez's new role and Rodriguez's training programs, they felt hope, real hope, that prejudice can be unlearned, that fear can be replaced by understanding that justice is not only possible, but profitable. And this hope spread beyond banking into public discourse, into classrooms, into political debates, where leaders cited the Amelia Protocol as evidence that reform need not destroy, that change can build. And this influence mattered most because it shaped the minds of young professionals entering the workforce, who carried with them the belief that businesses could stand for more than profit, that leadership meant moral courage, that greatness was measured not in dollars, but in dignity. And this belief is the quiet triumph of Dr. Richardson's journey, a triumph born not of anger, but of wisdom, not of power, but of patience. And this triumph now touched lives far beyond the walls of her bank, making the world a little fairer, a little kinder, a little more awake to the dangers of assumption and the power of grace. But the true measure of a leader and the true legacy of a movement is not found in the applause of the crowd or the warmth of headlines, but in the quiet, enduring impact it leaves behind, in the systems that remain long after the moment has passed. And in this, Dr. Amelia Richardson's story found its greatest triumph, because What began as a humiliating morning in her own bank lobby rippled outward to change not only Metropolitan Trust, but the entire financial industry in ways no one could have predicted because within months of the incident, other banks watching the public reaction and the success of the Amelia Protocol scrambled to create their own versions of bias detection and customer fairness policies. And this was not just corporate mimicry, it was survival because the market had spoken. Customers now demanded respect as a condition for their loyalty. Regulators now inspected diversity and fairness as part of compliance. Investors now weighed ethical reputation alongside profitability, and this shift was profound because it marked a turning point in the values of American business away from slogans and towards substance, from image to action, from pretending to performing. And this is rare in history because most scandals fade, most reforms are temporary, but here the change stuck because it made money, because it saved face, because it worked. And this working mattered deeply because it proved that doing right was not only moral but practical, not only good but smart. And this lesson spread beyond banks into retail chains where store managers trained to see customers, not suspects, into airlines where flight crews learned to challenge assumptions about passengers, into tech firms where hiring practices were rebuilt to detect and remove hidden bias. And each of these reforms trace back to the moment when Dr. Richardson chose to lead with grace, not anger, with policy, not protest. This impact is her greatest gift to the world because it shows that quiet strength can reshape entire systems if wielded with patience and skill. And the effects did not stop at corporate doors because universities began teaching the Amelia Protocol as a case study in ethics and leadership. Law schools debated its implications for workplace discrimination. Business schools praised its balance of justice and profitability. And this academic recognition mattered because it shaped the minds of the next generation of leaders who would carry these lessons into boardrooms and courtrooms and classrooms where culture itself is built. And this cultural shift grew as the media continued to tell the story, not as a fleeting outrage, but as a model of how to turn disaster into dignity, failure into force, because the world needs such models more than ever in a time of division and distrust and fear, when every headline brings conflict and scandal and rage. And so the story of a Black CEO who refused to be broken, who chose wisdom over wrath, stood out as a rare bright light. And this light drew the attention of government as federal agencies consulted Metropolitan Trust on setting new standards for consumer fairness, as Congress invited Dr. Richardson to testify on business ethics and inclusion, as state regulators asked for guidance on enforcing non-discrimination in banking. And this influence mattered because it made the change permanent, woven into law, into policy, into expectation. This permanence is rare and precious because so many reforms die with their champions, but here, the reforms outlived the moment, grew beyond. The founder became part of the system itself, and this is the true victory of the Amelia Protocol, that it transformed not only minds but machines, not only hearts but habits, and these habits made life better for millions of unseen customers who now walked into banks expecting fairness, receiving respect. And this daily dignity was the real reward, the quiet miracle that matters most, because it changed the experience of ordinary life for people who will never know Dr. Richardson's name, but who benefit from her courage every day. And this quiet miracle was joined by economic gains as the Minority Business Loan Fund, launched as part of the protocol, invested millions in startups owned by women and people of color, boosting local economies, creating jobs, building wealth. And these real results silenced the last skeptics who had doubted the value of reform and proved that inclusion pays in growth, in trust and prosperity. And this prosperity lifted communities once ignored, once excluded, now invited to share in the promise of the financial system. And this invitation restored faith among those long denied it. Because money is not only power but possibility. And when possibility is shared, society is healed. And this healing reached abroad as international banks copied the protocol, as foreign regulators cited its success as a model for global equity. And in this global echo, the story of one Black CEO in one American city became a beacon for justice everywhere. And this global reach mattered because prejudice is not only an American sin, it is a human one. And so the cure must be shared, must be taught, must be lived in every language, in every market, in every culture. And this teaching was the final gift of the Metropolitan Trust transformation, a living proof that courage guided by wisdom can change the world. Not with fury, but with patience. Not with protest, but with policy. Not with outrage, but with order. And this order shaped a better future for all. And this better future stands as the true legacy of Dr. Amelia Richardson and the choice she made to rise when others would fall to build, when others would break to lead, when others would rage. And because she chose this path, the world is different, better, stronger, and more just. But no great change comes without challenge, and even as Metropolitan Trust Bank flourished under the reforms of the Amelia Protocol, even as the boardrooms across the financial world echoed with new conversations about fairness and inclusion, even as business schools and policymakers praised the transformation, there remain voices of doubt, resistance corners of the old world reluctant to let go because this is always the truth of progress, that some will cling to the past, that inertia fights back. And so Dr. Amelia Richardson faced the quiet battle of sustaining what she had built. Because even inside her own company, not every heart changed at once. Not every habit fell away easily, because systems may evolve faster than minds. And this is where true leadership is tested, not in launching reforms, but in guarding them, in nurturing them until they grow roots strong enough to endure storms. Because behind the smiling news stories and the glowing stock reports, there were murmurs from a few senior staff, fearful that constant monitoring stifled creativity from some old guard board members who resented the new emphasis on ethics over profit from rival banks, whispering that Metropolitan's growth was luck, not proof, and these doubts mattered. Because if left unchecked, they could erode the foundation of change. And so Dr. Richardson responded, not with punishment or anger, but with relentless clarity, with town hall meetings where every employee was reminded why the protocol existed, with open forums where staff could voice their concerns and fears and questions without risk. And these conversations mattered because they turned skepticism into understanding, fear into trust, and this open culture became a shield against backsliding, because when people understand the why behind the what, they become guardians, not saboteurs of change. And this guarding mattered most when outside pressures came, when market analysts questioned the cost of so much training, when rival CEOs suggested Metropolitan Trust was distracted from profit, when impatient investors warned of overreach, because these voices could have swayed the board, could have slowed the reforms. But Dr. Richardson stood firm, armed not with slogans, but with data, because the truth was clear. Customer retention had risen, employee turnover had dropped, customer complaints about discrimination had vanished, minority loan approval rates had climbed, new markets had opened, and these numbers spoke louder than fear, louder than resistance, because they proved what the skeptics could not deny, that justice worked, that inclusion paid, that fairness built strength, and these facts silenced the last critics on the board and won over the cautious. And this victory mattered because it made the reforms permanent, not a phase, not a trend, but a way of life. And this permanence gave the bank a new identity, a reputation not only of safety, but of honor. And this reputation drew new customers, young people disillusioned by corporate greed, women seeking respectful lenders, immigrants searching for trusted partners. And these new faces changed the bank itself, made it younger, more diverse, more creative. And this creativity bred new ideas, new services designed for underserved markets, for small businesses, for first-time homebuyers. And this expansion made Metropolitan not only richer, but more important, because it filled needs others had ignored. And this filling of need mattered because it proved that justice was not a charity, but a competitive advantage. And this lesson spread to other sectors as tech giants asked how to replicate the protocol, as healthcare firms sought to adapt its principles to patient care, as public agencies explored bias detection in law enforcement. And this cross-industry influence marked the true flowering of the protocol, from banking to culture, from policy to practice, from one morning's humiliation to a national awakening. And this awakening brought rewards beyond profit, as awards came for corporate responsibility, as civic groups praised the bank's leadership, as communities once excluded now spoke of trust and partnership. This public embrace gave Dr. Richardson a quiet pride, not of victory over others, but of service to all. And this pride fueled her next vision, to spread the protocol beyond her own company, to build a foundation that would guide other industries, to publish the model, to teach the method, to mentor other leaders. And so the Amelia Foundation was born, a nonprofit dedicated to systemic fairness, to business ethics to organizational change. And this foundation mattered because it ensured that her work would not die with her career, but live on in the hands of the next reformers. And this legacy mattered most because it spoke to the deepest truth of all, that real change is not the act of one, but the movement of many, and that movements must be fed and led and renewed, or they fade. And so Dr. Richardson devoted herself to this work, to speaking, to writing, to guiding, and her voice joined the chorus of change makers shaping the future. And this chorus grew louder as more companies joined, as more universities taught, as more regulators required. And in this crescendo, the world of business became a little more, just a little more human. And this humanity mattered because it brought dignity to millions of transactions, unseen, uncelebrated, but real. And this dignity was the true measure of success, because profit fades and fame dims, but dignity endures. And in this enduring lay the greatest reward of all for Dr. Richardson and for all who followed her example. But even as the Amelia Protocol spread across industries, even as the Amelia Foundation gained partnerships and praise, there remained quiet questions beneath the surface about how far such change could reach, because while Metropolitan Trust had succeeded and while its rivals now copied its model, the deeper struggle was against habits centuries old, against assumptions taught in childhood, against fears whispered across generations. And this truth haunted Dr. Amelia Richardson, because she knew that policy could change rules, but only people could change minds, and changing minds was slow, was painful, was hard. And this was the unfinished work that lay ahead, because even as customers of color found more welcome at the teller's desk, even as minority business owners won fairer loans, even as hiring managers learned to check their biases, a deeper, quiet bias still lived in the choices people made unconsciously, in who they trusted, in who they promoted, in who they believed belonged. And this quiet bias mattered because it shaped the real world beyond the bank, beyond the boardroom, in housing, in healthcare, in education, in justice. And so Dr. Richardson knew that her victory in banking was only the first step of a longer journey, because the structures of discrimination are wide and deep, and they cannot fall at once. And this awareness drove her to broaden her mission to make the Amelia Foundation not only a guide for banks, but for schools, for hospitals, for police forces, for any system where power meets person, where judgment is made and dignity is risked. And this expansion began with cautious partnerships with universities teaching the protocol as part of leadership training, with hospitals piloting bias detection in patient care, with city governments exploring its principles in police hiring. These pilots mattered because they proved that the protocol was not limited to finance, that fairness was needed everywhere, that the lessons of humility and vigilance could heal many wounds. And this healing brought new allies, civil rights groups long skeptical of corporate promises, now cautiously hopeful that reform was real, that change was possible. And this cautious hope turned to real support as data showed reduced complaints, higher satisfaction, lower turnover in every institution that adopted the model. And this real success drew the attention of national leaders, of lawmakers who asked, could this be the seat of new regulation, of journalists who wrote of a quiet revolution spreading from one woman's courage. And this public attention mattered because it made the movement visible, gave it weight, gave it protection from being forgotten. And in this light, the story of Metropolitan Trust became a parable told in documentaries, in podcasts, in classrooms, a tale of modern redemption where failure became fuel, where mistake became movement. And this tale inspired young leaders who now dreamed not only of wealth, but of impact, who saw business not as profit machine, but as justice tool. And this dream shaped the next generation of CEOs, of founders, of public servants who entered their roles asking not only how to succeed, but how to serve. And this shift mattered because it signaled the slow birth of a new culture, one where ethics were not extra, but essential, where inclusion was not cost, but value, where fairness was not weakness, but strength. And this cultural birth was fragile but real, and it gave Dr. Richardson hope that her work would outlive her, that the fire she lit would burn in other hands. And this hope kept her moving, kept her speaking, kept her teaching, even as critics whispered that change was cosmetic, that bigotry could not be erased by training, that power would corrupt again. And these whispers stung because she knew they held some truth, because history was full of reforms that faded, of progress undone. But she also knew this deeper. Truth that every great change began as small and slow and fragile, that the civil rights movements of the past were once dismissed as naive, that workplace equality was once unthinkable, that every advance began in doubt and grew in persistence. And this knowledge gave her faith that the Amelia Protocol was planting seeds that would bloom in years not yet seen. And this faith was fed by the quiet stories that came to her desk by email, by letter, by whispered thanks, a young black teller, promoted to manager with pride, a Latina entrepreneur who won her first business loan, a disabled veteran whose mortgage was approved with respect. These small victories mattered more than awards. Because they were real, they were lives changed, they were proof that the system was shifting, and this proof gave her strength when tired, when discouraged, when the work seemed endless. And in this perseverance, she found her joy not in the public praise, but in the private progress, in the steady widening of justice, in the slow crumbling of walls. And this joy was a true reward, not riches, not power, but the knowledge that she had made her world better. Not perfect, but better. And this is the deepest lesson of her journey, that perfection is not required, that greatness is not the absence of failure, but the refusal to accept it as final. And this refusal is what made her a leader, not her title, not her shares, not her office, but her courage to stand when others bowed to act, when others froze to believe, when others doubted. And this courage is what now inspires others in every industry, in every cause, to lead with wisdom, to fight with patience, to build with care. And this inspiration is her true legacy, a legacy that grows in silence, in systems, in culture, in hearts. And this growing light is the quiet triumph of the Amelia Protocol, the quiet triumph of Dr. Amelia Richardson, the quiet triumph of change. But as the months turned into years and the story of the Amelia Protocol continued to ripple outward across industries and cities and even distant countries, Dr. Amelia Richardson came to realize that the real impact of her quiet rebellion in the bank lobby that morning was not merely in policies or procedures or market gains, but in the human lives that had been touched, changed, lifted by what she had dared to do, because this was the part the world rarely saw, the part beyond. The press releases and boardroom presentations where real people in real places carried the effects of her courage into their daily struggles and dreams, and this unseen influence mattered most. Because culture changes not only through laws and systems, but through hearts and habits. And in this quiet revolution, Dr. Richardson saw the greatest reward, because her inbox filled with stories from strangers, small business owners who finally won fair loans, young professionals who felt welcome, not watched when they entered the bank, immigrant families who opened accounts without fear of being judged, women who launched startups with confidence because they trusted their lender to see their worth. In these stories were the real currency of her success, the proof that what she had built was not theory, but life. And this life grew richer as more companies followed the example, as tech firms designed bias-free algorithms for hiring, as retail chains restructured customer service training to prevent discrimination, as schools adopted inclusive leadership curricula based on the protocol. And in this widening circle of reform, the world began to change in small, slow, undeniable ways. This change reached unexpected places as religious organizations sought guidance on fairness, as nonprofit groups used the protocol to improve client care, as international banks in Europe and Asia adapted its principles to local cultures, proving that justice needs no translation, only courage. And this global reach amazed even Dr. Richardson, who had once dreamed only of protecting her bank, her staff, her customers, but now saw her vision carried by others into industries and nations she would never visit. And this gift humbled her, because it reminded her that great movements begin not with ambition, but with necessity, with the simple refusal to accept what is wrong. And this refusal had been her strength that day in the lobby when Marcus Webb misjudged her and her staff failed her, and security prepared to escort her from her own domain, because in that humiliation she found resolve, not rage. And this resolve changed everything, and it reminded her that anyone in any moment could make such a choice. And this lesson mattered because it inspired not only leaders, but ordinary people, clerks who chose kindness over suspicion, managers who chose fairness over convenience, officers who chose care over force. And these choices multiplied, became habit, became culture, became the new normal in places touched by her example. And this normalization was the real miracle, because when justice becomes routine, not rare, when respect becomes standard, not special, when fairness becomes expected, not earned, then the world is truly better. And this better world now shaped the dreams of children who saw Phoenix Riders parades where bikers once brought fear, who entered banks, where customers of every color stood with pride, who studied in schools where difference meant strength, not risk. And these children would grow into adults who carried no memory of the old shame. The old fear, the old silence, and this generational change mattered because it promised a future freer than the past, and this promise was the greatest legacy of Dr. Richardson's work. Not the reforms alone, not the profits, not the honors, but the simple new belief planted in young minds that dignity was normal, that fairness was possible, that justice was expected, and this belief spread like sunlight into shadow, like warmth into cold, like hope into despair, and it lit places long dark, places of poverty and prejudice, of exclusion and fear. And in this light, old enemies found peace, old rivals found respect, old wounds began to heal. And this healing was the quiet revolution, the slow transformation born of one morning's humiliation turned into courage, turned into grace, turned into power. This power grew not from control, but from trust, not from force, but from example, not from victory, but from service. And this service made Metropolitan Trust a symbol of more than finance, a beacon of social leadership, a model of corporate humanity. And this model inspired young entrepreneurs to dream new dreams, not only of wealth, but of worth, of companies built to heal, not harm, to include, not exclude, to serve, not exploit. And these dreams mattered because they shaped the next generation of markets and movements and methods, and this shaping would ripple far beyond the lifetime of Dr. Richardson, carried by those who never knew her name, but felt her influence in the fairness of a loan officer, the patience of a teacher, the kindness of a nurse, the justice of a judge. And this is how true change lives, not in monuments, but in moments, not in speeches, but in standards, not in glory, but in grace. And this grace now filled the quiet corners of the world where dignity met duty and choice met courage. And in these corners, the real revolution continued, slow, quiet, certain, and in this certainty, Dr. Richardson found peace, knowing that the work she had begun would never end, but would carry forward in every small, brave act of fairness that made the world a little better each day. And so as the story of Dr. Amelia Richardson and the quiet revolution of Metropolitan Trust reached its gentle close, not with a sudden triumph or dramatic conclusion, but with the steady, enduring change that marks every true legacy, the lesson became clear to all who heard it that real power is not the ability to command or punish or dominate, but the quiet courage to choose what is right when it would be easier to walk away. Because when Dr. Richardson stood in her own bank lobby, humiliated and wrongly accused, she could have unleashed fury, could have sued, could have fired, could have shamed, but instead she chose patience, strategy, dignity. And because of that choice, the world shifted. And this choice matters because it reminds us all that leadership is not about control, but about service, about holding open the door of change for others to walk through, about carrying the burden of progress so that others can walk lighter. And this is the secret of true strength, not the roar, but the whisper, not the spotlight, but the shadow, where real decisions are made. And this strength shaped not only a bank, not only an industry, but a generation. Because as the Amelia protocol became law and standard and expectation as the lessons of that morning spread into schools and governments and families, a new belief was born in the minds of young leaders that doing good and doing well were not opposites, but partners, that ethics and profit could live side by side, that justice was not a cost, but a currency. And this belief will shape the future of every company, every boardroom, every startup that rises from now on, because they have seen proof that fairness works, that grace wins, that patience changes everything. This proof is rare and precious because the world is full of cynicism, full of doubt, full of those who say people cannot change systems, cannot heal progress, cannot last. But here in the quiet success of a bank once broken by bias, now rebuilt by courage, the cynics are silenced and hope stands tall. And this hope fuels the dreams of every young girl who wonders if she belongs in business, of every minority graduate who wonders if they will be seen, of every customer who wonders if they will be served with respect. And this hope matters because it gives them the strength to try to dare to rise. And so the ripple widens, touching every life. It meets, lifting every soul. It brushes, shaping every choice it touches until one day this hope becomes the new normal, the silent assumption that fairness is expected, that dignity is standard, that justice is routine. And on that day, the world will have forgotten the fear, the doubt, the pain that once shadowed its banks and its boardrooms, and will remember only the quiet certainty that this is how things have always been, and this forgetting will be the final victory of Dr. Amelia Richardson, because it will mean that her work is done not because the struggle is finished, but because the culture is changed, because the future no longer needs reminding, because the lessons have taken root, and this root will grow into strong trees of justice sheltering generations to come. And this growth will be her monument, not a statue, not a title, not a fortune, but a forest of fairness, a world more whole, more honest, more human, because one woman chose to stand her ground, to claim her space, to lift her voice, not in anger, but in wisdom, not for revenge, but for renewal, not to punish the past, but to build the future. And this building is now ours to continue, because the story of the Amelia Protocol is not over. It has only begun. It lives in every workplace that checks its bias, every manager that listens with care, every company that values every person, not for their look, but for their worth. And this living story calls to each of us to do the same, to make justice not an event, but a habit, not a headline, but a way of life, not a dream, but a daily truth. And if we accept this call, if we live this truth, if we carry this torch, then the world will keep changing step by patient step, moment by quiet moment, until the dream Dr. Richardson dared to believe becomes the world we all share. And in this world, there will be no more mornings like the one she endured, no more lobbies where worth is questioned, no more doors closed to dignity. Only the open welcome of fairness made real, and this welcome will be the true reward, the final triumph, the lasting legacy. And for this, we thank her not with applause, but with action, not with words, but with work, not with praise, but with promise. The promise to keep building, to keep believing, to keep choosing courage over comfort, grace over rage, truth over fear, until the world she dreamed of stands strong and sure and shining forever.